all, Kinsey Schofield here. Welcome to Crown and Conflict, a series dedicated to dissecting the most riveting royal scandals in history. This week's scandal is a little different. There were no affairs, no leaks, no explosive interviews. Instead, this was a slow burning reputational reckoning. For decades, King Charles was mocked, dismissed, and openly ridiculed for his obsession with the environment. They were accusing him of being out of touch, eccentric, even unhinged for championing sustainability long before it was fashionable. And yes, this is the man who was laughed at for talking to his plants, but history has a funny way of settling scores. On February 6th, Finding Harmony, A King's Vision premieres globally on Amazon Prime Video, exploring King Charles's lifelong environmental philosophy and how ideas once treated as fringe are now central to the global conversation. Joining me today is Sally Bedell Smith, author of Prince Charles, The Passions and Paradoxes of an Improbable Life, and the founder of Royals Extra on Substack, a must subscribe. Sally, let's talk about the long arc of this so-called scandal, the timeline of the king's environmental work, the criticism he faced for it, and how the man once laughed out of the room was decades ahead of everyone else. You're an insider. You've seen this evolution. Do you sit back and look at a documentary like this and go, it's about time?
Well, yes, but it should be noted that this is the third of these documentaries that he's done, and I
Yeah.
really hope that this one sticks. I mean, he did a documentary as long ago as 1990
Yeah.
called The Earth in Balance, and he interviewed Al Gore. And what do you know? 2 years later, Al Gore did his book called Earth in the Balance, and Prince Charles later joked about that.
Yeah. You think he
And
might
then
have inspired it a little bit?
And then, of course, Al Gore went on in 2006 to do An Inconvenient Truth, which was a huge hit, got an Oscar, and won the Nobel Peace Prize. And then in 2010 is when Charles really did the sort of baseline documentary that this Amazon documentary sort of follows up on, and that was called Harmony. And it had a companion book called Harmony. Here it is. It's huge. I've read the whole thing, cover to cover.
Wow.
We can talk about that later if you want.
I love that.
But it just didn't. It didn't. Neither the documentary nor the book really landed. Part of the problem was that the Harmony documentary involved an interview with Charles by Brian Williams, who mischievously, this was a time when Camilla was, everybody said Camilla was going to be the prince's consort
Right.
when he became king. And Brian Williams said, well, what about it? And Charles said, well, we'll just have to see. And of course, all the headlines after that were, will Camilla be queen? And poor Charles, because the substance of the documentary, which was really very good, it focused on people who were actually trying to do things, logging companies that were working on, reducing, mitigating the way they cut down their timber. A farmer in Louisiana who had adopted organic principles. These were all, it was a good movie. And it just got sort of swept away. Charles tried again in 2012 by premiering it at London Sundance with Robert Redford, but it didn't work there either. And the book, which is, it's admirable in many ways, and it tries to pull together Charles's multitude, really, of theories about the environment and the interconnectedness of everything, and the importance of ancient wisdom and all that. But it is sort of too convoluted, too complicated. It would have been much better if it had been simpler.
Nature
And
for dummies. Nature for dummies. Not so heavy.
oh, he did a children's book too.
Oh,
He was really trying to get his ideas across, and but I think in the end it was just too dense, too complex. So what I'm hoping is that this movie will do a couple of things. It will get these ideas to a new audience on Amazon, and it will sort of help him rebrand his reign and reboot a lot of these ideas that he has held passionately. I called my book The Passions and Paradoxes. He is passionate about every idea that he advocates. And so it'll be great. I want to see it. I'm very curious about it.
Well,
And I think, we can only hope that it will reach a new audience and it will reframe a lot of these ideas in a way that will be more accessible to people.
you mentioned the distractions that, first of all, fingers crossed, third time's the charm, yes. But you mentioned these distractions that can sometimes take away from his ultimate objective, which is really to share his wealth of knowledge on this topic he's so passionate about. uh, the one of the last times we were talking one on one, similar to this situation, we were interrupted by the breaking news that Prince Harry was at Clarence House, that the King and Prince Harry were having a meeting. Now, Prince Harry was just in London last week, I believe, for his trial against the Daily Mail. The King was in Scotland at the beginning of the week, but did head back to London in the time frame that Prince Harry was in London, and they did not see each other. Does that surprise you? And yes, we're going to get back to talking about King Charles, and he's going to be the focus. But I do think that, considering the fact that the last time we spoke, we were so surprised by the fact that Harry had shown up to Clarence House, that it's interesting to see the difference this time around.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think the reason I'm, I think it's a pretty good guess that the reason he didn't want to see him is because Harry is in the middle of a very controversial trial, and he and six other plaintiffs are taking on the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday. And Harry's testimony was very sort of angry and contemptuous, and he went after the lawyer, and the judge had to rebuke him. It was not a pretty sight. And I don't think that Charles wanted to get anywhere near that until it's resolved, and it may not be resolved for months. And I do think also there is the question of Harry's security and whether government security will be restored to him. Those things are, that's a real issue because that potentially involves Charles, since Harry has said along the way, well, he thinks that his father could sort of wave a magic wand and make his security come back, which is not exactly the way it works.
Mm-hmm. It does feel like we're seeing more pressure from Harry. I know that there's a lot of when I say rival court, I don't think that Harry is going to try to set up a formal rival court in the UK, but there is a sense that he's trying to distract from the good work that's being done by the working royals. Were you surprised to see that Invictus is launching a new award show there this year, when there's so much exciting progress happening with Earthshot and with all of the King's initiatives happening in 2026 in that neck of the woods?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an exercise in futility. Look, the Invictus Games are really admirable. I remember when he began them. I remember he went to Denver and he watched the Warrior Games, and he came back to London, and that was just between the US and the UK. And he said, I want to do this globally. And he had wonderful people who were working with him, who helped him turn it into a reality. And for him, it is a passion. And it is really right now, since his other charities have fallen apart for one reason or another. It is his main thing. But I do think that to stage events that are kind of distractions from much bigger enterprises like Earthshot, which is, we can get to it later, but it's a really significant initiative by William.
Yeah, I just I don't understand the fixation on returning over there, except for the fact that that's where he knows his value is. And even if they refuse to see him, that proximity gives him a little bit of royal sparkle that he can bring back to the United States. But you could hold the Invictus award show anywhere in the world. Why
Yeah,
do it
you can
back home?
do it in LA. Yeah.
Exactly. You
I
could do
mean,
it
it's
after the aviation awards that you so gleefully accepted. Let's
yeah.
get back to King Charles because you wrote this beautiful book about him. I'm curious to know when you started reaching out to some of your sources and contacts, did they have confidence in his environmental um, passion? Did they have confidence or did they see it as a strength and not a weakness? Because the papers were really ugly to King Charles in the 70s and in the 80s, I mean, in the 90s, about this unique interest he had in gardening and in the world and how nature can heal. Did you hear whispers of that from the people closest to him, or did they understand him?
The people I spoke to who were working with him believed very much in what he was doing. People like Tony Juniper, who worked with him, who helped him to write Harmony, and people like Justin Mundy, who ran his international sustainability unit. They knew that he had great knowledge, great commitment, that he had been doing this since February 17th, 1970, when he gave a really remarkable speech. He was 21 years old. He spoke in Wales. He was about to graduate from Cambridge, and there was an environmental commemoration going on. And the speech is really worth reading because on the one hand, he says, and it's true because we had Earth Day by then and people were beginning to recognize environmentalism. He even praised the press, but he 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 was very outspoken. He spoke of pollution's cancerous effects, how it was affecting the oceans, how it was affecting chemical waste, was affecting rivers, how it was affecting the air, and he also kind of bravely said people need to consider the cost of really dealing with this, and human nature is sort of stubborn and prejudiced. I mean, these were words that he used, and we're not willing to pay what was needed to remedy these things, and they were you know unwilling to accept regulations and restraints and discipline. I mean, it was a very mature argument,
Yeah.
and that was the template for what he would add to it over the years. But that was the real foundation for what he has advocated for all these years. And at the time, nobody really criticized him because nobody really noticed it. And and then he started meeting people like Fritz Schumacher, who wrote a book called Small is Beautiful that was very influential. It was anti-globalism. It was, local sourcing. It was renewable energy versus oil. There were a whole lot of ideas that Prince Charles incorporated into his advocacy. But it wasn't. And still, people weren't really paying attention. I mean, he was in the Navy, and it wasn't until the early '80s when he began to be really outspoken. And I would say his first big speech, taking on the establishment, as it were, was in 1983 when he went after agriculture. And he said that, monoculture, agribusiness, was really bad. They were using pesticides, fertilizers that were damaging the environment, and he pushed organic farming, and he got some pushback. The most controversial thing that he did was attacking genetically modified food, GM,
Wow.
and that continued over the years, and he got a lot of criticism for it from very high profile people like Stephen Hawking and Richard Dawkins, and they all said, "You're wrong. Your science is wrong." And over the years, this is the one blind spot I think that he's had over the years. The science and research has proved over and over that GM does not, harm humans who eat it, and it doesn't harm the environment. I mean, that's a pretty consistent finding in the UK, in the US, in the EU, and around the world, and that it has had a lot of benefits. But it's one of those instances where he has just dug in his heels and has not wavered from his position. But I think that's sort of an outlier
Yeah.
from a lot of other things that have very much aligned with mainstream views. From being a sort of prophet on the outside, he's come into the mainstream.
What sources or experiences shaped his early environmental consciousness? Was it being at school? Was it Prince Philip? When you talk to the people around him, how, where do you think he got his ideas, or who inspired him? You mentioned some of the authors he engaged with, but it
Yeah,
does feel like this started at a pretty young age when, of course, the papers are fixated on who he's dating. He
right.
wants to stand there and give a speech about the environment.
Well, yes, and I think it all began in his childhood, really, in places like Balmoral. And he's written about he has felt such a connection with the streams and the forests and the moors and the mountains, and he's painted them in his watercolors. And I think they're really sort of part of him. They're embedded in him. And then um, Tony Juniper, who who wrote harmony with him and who will be in this documentary, he said it was a very good quote. He said, since his teenage years, he has carried a set of views about our place in the natural environment in the world. And I think that's very true. And you mentioned Prince Philip, and I think he was a very important influence in a slightly different way. He became a conservation advocate back
Mhm.
in 1956 when he was traveling the world on Britannia. And he started taking pictures of birds that were following the ship. And he became a bird watcher, and he got to know naturalists, and he helped found the World Wildlife Federation. And that became his main purpose. Charles was influenced by that, but he decided to take a different route and become much more outspoken. And they have differed over the years, including over GM crops. And at one point, Prince Philip said, "Well, that's ridiculous. We've been doing that ever since natural selection." And he came out publicly a few times and rebuked Charles. But by and large, I think he was proud of what Charles did.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that Prince William used to hang out with naturalists, as I am a naturalist. That means that I could have maybe,
Well, Prince Philip hung out with
yeah,
naturalists.
maybe if
And
I,
now William is. People, yeah.
yeah, I love that. I went to school to be a naturalist. Um, Talk to me about the concept of harmony between humanity and nature. Um, this Has there been an evolution, because you've been watching it for so long? We have not seen the documentary yet. It's coming out February 6th. But do you think that there's a change in messaging? Do you think that there's an evolution, or do you think they're really sharing the same message?
I think the fundamentals are the same. I think, as I mentioned before, he's met more people, he's been exposed to more ideas. he's incorporated, um, some of the new approaches, the new solutions. But again, Tony Juniper said it's not a question of him discarding anything. That as he's gone along over the decades, he's added. And one of the things that he's tried to do from the very beginning, and that was evident in that very first speech, was to join up, to be a convener, to see the links between um, various ideas and principles. Sometimes it would baffle his mother and his father when he would come up with these unified field theories, but he believes in them. And he also, and this goes back to one of his first mentors, Lawrence Vanderpost. He has this very strong belief in the wisdom of the ancients and how modern life has become disconnected from that. And those sorts of ideas were very much in evidence in the book Harmony.
This seems like a silly question, but how much do you think the idea of harmony and nature is involved? Well, I mean, maybe it's not a silly question in the healing of Catherine and the King's cancers, because it does feel like this is that they've made that such a priority.
I think, there's no documented evidence, but I think he has long believed in the power. I mean, he believed in homeopathic medicine, which you can agree with or disagree with. But I think what he has said over the years about nature and its healing power, I think has been demonstrated. I mean, I remember he was talking about how hospitals should, incorporate even images of nature more in the rooms and in the settings, and that he felt that would be calming and would help the body repair. And now we've seen Catherine with her 4 videos about nature and her very direct comments on how she feels that nature and its calming force has played a role in her own recovery. And I think they're very much aligned on that. Whether he influenced her into taking that point of view, I don't know. But it is striking that they're definitely singing from the same hymnal.
It's true. It's true. And I believe that too. It's amazing how you can be in a funk and just take a walk around the block and how
There's
much,
scientific evidence.
yeah, it's just
It
like, wow.
works.
I am glad that I took that little brisk walk around the block because I feel 100 times better. Let's talk wellness without the scare tactics. Life is busy. Mornings start fast. Coffee is essential and routines need to work, not complicate things. People want products that support how they live now because real beauty is about supporting what keeps you strong, radiant, and feeling your best. That's where Native Path Collagen comes in. No, this is not a trendy, overhyped beauty product. This is the real deal. It contains type 1 and type 3 collagen, which makes up roughly 90% of the collagen found in the human body. These are the building blocks that support skin, hair, and joint health. Native Path helps support those systems. One single ingredient, no fillers, no nonsense, just high quality collagen. Each morning, 1 scoop can be mixed into your coffee or your favorite beverage. It dissolves easily, has no taste, and fits seamlessly into your everyday routine. Many people report stronger hair, smoother, more hydrated skin, and less joint stiffness, especially in the mornings. Try it for yourself. Visit getnativepath.com/unfiltered to take advantage of a special offer today. Here comes the spelling test. Ready? It's native, NATIVE, path, PATH.com/unfiltered for a special bundle deal at a fraction of the retail price, backed by a risk-free 365-day guarantee. If you want to look good, feel good, and actually support your body instead of just hoping your moisturizer is magic, Native Path is where you start. Getnativepath.com/unfiltered. Can you talk to me about projects like the Prince's Rainforest Project and International Stability Unit? the king was concerned about rainforests before I think anybody was. I mean, I'm sure that there are some corners of the world that were having those conversations, but did he make those conversations mainstream?
Absolutely. I mean, I was struck that the very first speech he gave about the importance of rainforests was in 1990
Mm-hmm.
at Kew Gardens in London. And then in 2007, he launched his Rainforest Initiative. And I do think it was one of the most important things he did to raise awareness. In March of 2009, he was in Brazil and he gave a speech. One of the things he said in it was probably a little too dire and specific when he said, "We have 100 months to repair the world." And then, naturally the press jumped all over that and said, "That's ridiculous. Um, that can't possibly be true." But, unfortunately, it sort of obscured the larger message, which was mainly about rainforests and how they're so important to capture CO2 and to promote rainfall and um, and to promote biodiversity. He made some very strong points. And a month later, that was in April. That was in March of 2009. In April of 2009, I was in London when they were having the G20 meeting, and it was April. And he convened, and this is one of the things. I'll make a little digression that he really has had three stages of his activity. And the first was sort of raising the alarm, making speeches, letting people know that these were problems, putting them on the agenda. And then the third has been convening. And this meeting in London in April of 2009 was a great example of how he could use his convening power. He brought 14 major countries to St. James's Palace. Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State, was the US representative. And they agreed that they would uh, pledge $6 billion to primarily South American countries to um, prevent them from cutting down rainforests and to help them make a transition to cash crops that would provide them income. There was even a very specific initiative between Norway and Guyana, where Norway pledged $250 million just one on one
Wow.
to do that. So that was a very specific thing that he did. They also, in the aftermath of that, they had a sort of sweet media campaign that featured William and Harry and celebrities like Daniel Craig and Harrison Ford. And they had this little computer generated rainforest frog. And it was pretty successful. They got it into a lot of schools and it raised awareness. Now, the Rainforest Initiative then sort of folded into this international sustainability unit. I spent a fair amount of time with Justin Mundy, who headed the ISU. They, they pushed the needle. They worked with government, they worked with business. They had another conference that I went to in 2013 where they were trying to get business leaders to recognize the need, for example, to be more sustainable in their supply chains. And one of they had people like Walmart, Del
Wow.
Monte,
Yeah.
Coca-Cola. They had, all the big guns.
Yeah.
And one of them said, we have changed the way we source our palm oil. We're only getting it from existing palm plantations. We will not allow any cutting down of forests to create at these palm plantations. So, I mean, these were not, huge, but they were important.
Yeah.
And one of the things you mentioned in your email to me was uh, how Charles was ridiculed for talking to plants, and for years. And one of the participants in this forum, the head of Del Monte said, there's research showing that music and really nice environmental sounds actually help plants to grow. And so, again, Charles was ahead of the curve, and people came around
Yeah.
and recognized that he knew what he was talking about.
Is it because you've covered every aspect of his life? Is it fair to assume that because there was stress in his marriage, that this was such a great escape for his sanity, for his mental health, to really throw himself into this work? I mean, I do believe that this is a man that wants to leave the world a better place than he found it at his core. But I also wonder if this work gave him some oxygen sometimes when he really needed it around the chaos of the tabloid headlines.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I made, a pretty strong point of that in the book, that he is by nature a workaholic. And I remember talking again to Tony Juniper about writing harmony, and he said Charles was working 18-hour days, which was not unusual for him. But I do think that it did give him an outlet um, from the strife that he was experiencing in his marriage. And it gave him purpose. Not that he's ever lacked purpose, but it gave him purpose in a bunch of different directions. I mean, he started his model community, Poundbury, um, and he had projects like the ones we've been talking about. He started a countryside fund. I'm not sure that was. I think that was after Diana, but he went after the architect, modern architecture during the years that he was married to Diana. There were a lot of things that he did that were very good, and I'm sure gave him some satisfaction, and really, turned his mind away from the turmoil in his life.
Yeah, I just I look at some of the well, I look at everything he executed because when I was putting this together, I sent you this long timeline, and half of the
Yeah.
projects I'd never even heard of. And yes, it's definitely a reflection of his workaholic attitude that we know he still has today. While Queen Camilla is like, "Can you please take a beat?" He's still getting treated for cancer. Um, but it also just shows somebody that's eager to contribute to the world. And I really do admire that.
Yeah, I remember I quoted something in the book where Queen Elizabeth II's, her favorite, I think, private secretary said, "Ma'am, you have to spread a carpet of happiness." And for Charles, he looked at the carpet of the world and he saw the holes and he just wanted to repair them. And I do think, he said, um, I want to I want to preserve nature. Um, and I think that's been a real animating force for many years.
I love that. I love that carpet holes line. That's gonna stick with me forever. Can you talk to me about farming at the Duchy of Cornwall and the banning of peat at Highgrove and how that serves as practical models for sustainable land management today?
Well, I think he very deliberately made high growth into a model for organic farming. And the peat aspect is really interesting because in his 1990 documentary, The Earth in Balance, he opened it with a segment on the flow country in very northern Scotland, which is a lot of peat. And he showed images of it being plowed up, which they were going to build, they were going to put up some pine trees. And, planting trees isn't all that bad, obviously. But what his point was that they were disturbing a very essential ecosystem, and that peat in the ground is very important because it controls CO2. And so he decided that he wouldn't have any peat used as fertilizer or whatever in his farm or in his gardens. And whether that individual decision had an impact on government policy, but as of, I think, 2024, peat was banned for use by gardeners. And so I think, his ideas like that filter down. And he has been adamant about how organic cultivation is better for the soil, is better for the products, the vegetables that are produced. The problem with organic farming, and I buy all kinds of organic food all the time because I do think it's better. But I think for example, his own farmers who leased from his Duchy of Cornwall, were reluctant to do it because it's harder to make money. And it's also really difficult to do at large scale. Um, so I think, there has to be some sort of balance, and we do need agribusiness to feed the world. I remember talking to Mark Price, who was at one point the president of Waitrose, which is the partner with Charles in his Duchy of Cornwall products. And even he admitted that if we followed local, sustainable, organic farming for everything, we'd all be eating turnips during the winter. We wouldn't have, blueberries from South America or, so organic, I think, is important. And I think it should be adopted more and more, but it's not the ultimate solution. And Charles probably has a hard time getting his head around that because he would like it to be otherwise.
I imagine that is the case. You mentioned that there was inspiration from Prince Philip, but King Charles, really finds his own niche and finds his own focus. Do you feel like the king is a little bit more aligned in Prince William's pursuits? Do you feel like they are pursuing the same things when it comes to even Earthshot?
Absolutely. I mean, William has picked up the baton. Earthshot is very impressive. I mean, it's sort of structured in a different way from Charles. Charles has always been kind of lateral in his approach to his initiatives. He'll do something over here and something over there, and he'll try and join them up. But the way William has operated really from the very beginning of his foundation is with much greater focus. And so Earthshot has adopted a lot of the same principles as his father. It's interested in climate change, it's interested in the oceans, it's interested, in farming, and what they're doing is they're picking 5 winners every year, giving them £1 million. They're from all over the world. But and it has an end point. It's going to end in 2030, and they will have given out £50 million. And their criteria are very strict, and they're looking at creative ideas for tackling these myriad problems in 5 different categories. And I think out of the 25 so far, 3 or 4 of them have already proved that they can scale up, which is pretty good. But all of this is very much aligned with what his father has been trying to accomplish really since he began to speak out in, you know, at a high volume since the early 80s.
Well, even when you were talking to me about the king managing to get, a group of experts in the room, a group of world leaders in a
Yeah.
room to talk for the first time, that it feels like William's team has recognized what a great
Yes.
strategy that is. William never hesitates to say, I'm not the smartest person in the room. That's why I brought this guy over here from this homeless center and this person over here from this. This is an architect who builds who builds homes that are affordable. And, I feel like that they built this really great template through Prince Charles's initial organization of how to cultivate people that are smarter than them, the best in
Yeah.
the business, and figure out a way for everybody to work together to create change. But it's also benefiting everybody in the room, just the Royal Association and actually accomplishing something. Like you also said, and I love this about William, I'd love for Earthshot to continue forever, but there's an end date there. So you can, it's easier to evaluate the analytics. It's easier to see and measure success based on the fact that he's got this timeline. It all just seems so streamlined and brilliant. And it's nice to see that King Charles kind of kicked that stuff into high gear years ago.
I think he did. And I think one of the things that's been very important for him is to show what he can do. And I think one of the best examples of that is Poundbury, which I visited twice, his model community in Dorset. That he began in 1992 and it's due to be completed in 2028. I remember at some point about 10 years ago, he said, "Oh, I hope I live to see the completion of it." I'm now convinced that he will. But it is, and it is a fantastically imagined way to create a community that is very human centered. And it's also very beautiful. I was reading a piece in the Daily Telegraph today about the hideous housing developments that are being built around Britain. And at the end, it came back to Poundbury and said, "This is the model." And
Wow.
even with terrible regulations that had and hurdles that have to be passed, Poundbury has managed to do it. And they've also done it in many different ways that make it sustainable. One of my favorite things was the anaerobic digestive system that they installed years ago that uses corn and potato residue and all these byproducts, waste, all this waste, and they turn them into fuel and they power Poundbury. So it's a great example of how you can put your words into practice because it was preceded by yet another documentary that he did in the 80s called A Vision of Britain. And he laid out all his principles for what he thought architecture should do.
Mhm.
And it even goes back to his very first speech in which he said, you have to think about the community, and architects need to think about what it would be like to live in the places that they design. And that was certainly one of the principles behind Poundbury. And there is some evidence that there are other places around the UK that have adopted that philosophy. And William is doing that in different ways. He has the Duchy of Cornwall, which is what has provided the resources and the land for Poundbury. And William is applying his own angle in one of the communities that Charles started. William is emphasizing on homelessness. And so, I think um, they have similar objectives, but they're carried out in slightly different ways.
It is, I primarily cover the Sussexes. So to see such an organized landscape, to see such structure is always a pleasant surprise considering the fact that I'm covering chaos typically over here in the States. Um,
Yeah.
this is not something I warned you about, so I apologize. But I remember around the time of the coronation, all anyone wanted to talk to me about was an Aston Martin that ran on wine and cheese. Can you give me any information about that?
I don't know. He has several of these cars, and he
That's
just
so great.
showcased a new one. I think this Lotus is also, I don't know how you combine wine and cheese. I understand the wine part,
Mm.
um, and how you can make a biofuel out of that. But now he has this really fancy car that I think is also run on biofuels. And he has, I think there, I mean, I don't know if the Queen had one, but I think there are other cars in the royal fleet that are also doing this.
How
Um,
funny.
and it's so consistent with how he is. It's a little quirky,
Yeah.
but it works.
I love it. I love it. Last question, and thank you for being so generous with your time. How does the king balance his environmental advocacy with his constitutional role as king? Because it does feel like whenever well, people just love to say you're not allowed to say that because you're the king, and this is too political. Somehow protecting the world has become political instead of everybody just coming together saying, let's leave this place better than we found it. Do you see that he is, being careful, treading lightly? Has he changed the way that he handles this since you've started covering him? What is your observation?
Well, I think he made it very clear in his very first speech after he took the throne. He said, there are things that I can't talk about that I used to be very vocal about, and I have to observe the convention of the monarch, which is to be neutral. But that doesn't mean he can't continue to convene or even to speak out. But the point is that when he does it on the advice of government. And of course, when he was Prince of Wales, he would go off on his own bat and say things that would make government ministers pull their hair out. But now he knows, what the rules are. And it'll be interesting to see in this documentary, which I think is yet another way that he's trying to show not tell. And that I'm imagining that he will probably not say anything outspoken, but that doesn't mean other people who are interviewed won't say things that are outspoken or reiterate things that he has said in the past. But I think he has been pretty careful to walk that line and not antagonize people by saying things that are contrary to what the government would believe, or want him to say. I go back to the GM issue when he was being so outspoken, and Tony Blair was so angry, and he
Mhm.
went to the Queen and he complained. But uh, that sort of thing. He is the king, and he knows what his limits are.
Yeah. Do you remember, was it Rishi Sunak that asked him not to go to an event?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can't remember. I think it was one of the cop. It was a
I believe
cop
you're right.
um, event, and he didn't go
Yeah.
because he couldn't.
Mm.
But that was an acceptance of his limits.
Yeah, that was surprising to me at the time, but I did appreciate the fact that there was no pushback, there was no
Oh,
drama surrounding it at all. He accepted it
yeah.
and it was fine. Sally Bedell Smith, such a pleasure to speak to you. If you are a regular watcher, you enjoy listening to Sally and I talk, or you just enjoy listening to Sally, Royals Extra on Substack is where you can get her sent straight to your inbox. You can get all sorts of good intel right to your email. So please go subscribe over at Substack. And then just type her name into any book store online, Amazon, wherever. And she has an entire library of beautifully written royal books that will just make you feel so. Go grab your blanket, get in front of your fireplace, and cozy up with one of those books because they are so comforting and peaceful. And you're so knowledgeable, Sally. Thank you so much for your time today. Not the sexiest topic, but I think that time is going to be very kind to King Charles when it comes to his pursuits here. And I think it's important that we acknowledge he was ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, no, thank you. Your questions were great. I really enjoyed the conversation. And thank you for all your kind words.
I just love you. All right. Agree with us, disagree with us. Let us know in the comments below. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.